What up, though? Elephants don't send baby elephants to another group of elephants to teach the baby elephant how to be an elephant. The mother elephant spends its days and nights teaching the baby elephant where the water source is, which characters to be aware of at the water source, the benefits and importance of the trees, leaves, flowers. Humans, though, humans send their young to start being educated by other humans, starting with when you leave the child or children with a relative or friend or nanny at 4 months old or so. Then daycare at 12 months, then preschool at 4 years old, on to elementary school at 5 years old. After elementary school, the child or children move on to junior high, then high school, college, university, graduate school, and before you know it, you, the parents, have effectively been absent from your child's or children's entire existence in this life on planet Earth. Sending your child or children to fend for themselves, to figure out the behavior of other human beings, to avoid pitfalls and recognize what is genuine. How could you do it? How do you do it? Do you have any compassion, any kindness, a heart? Are you numb? Is your job and or career more important than your child or children? You sending your child or children to other humans, some beneficial, some damaged beyond remedy. You don't only send your precious children to be handled by other humans, you send them to be ridiculed, taunted, bullied, groped, beaten, and influenced by other children. The Natural Child Project, The Human Baby, by James Kimmel, PhD. Mothers are biologically and genetically designed to nurture their babies. A newborn's mother has everything a baby needs: arms to hold him, breasts with human milk to feed and comfort him, a human body to share with him, a person to protect and be there for him. She is someone who has evolved with the power and specific resources that will allow her baby to continue to live and to develop normally after he is born. Mother and infant did not evolve separately, but together. The mother is the other half of the human nurturing process, a process which begins at conception and which continues for many years after birth. Mother and baby evolve to be a nursing couple in close physical contact day and night. The nurturing process after birth, although it is genetically and biologically continuous with the process before birth, is unfortunately not automatic. In humans, the mother can choose and be influenced by others within her culture to discontinue being a part of this process. Maternal instincts in the animal kingdom, One Earth. Maternal instinct in the animal kingdom, Channing Sargent, One Earth contributor. Elephants may be the most protective moms on the planet. Herds of females and children usually travel together in a circle with the youngest member on the inside protected from predators. Kangaroos care for their remarkably vulnerable babies by carrying them in their pouches for months, maintaining constant skin to skin contact while the joey gestates for another 120 to 450 days. Kangaroos only emerge permanently from their mother's pouch at 10 months old, but for the next 8 to 11 months continue to periodically suckle from their mother. Panda moms at an average of 300 pounds cradle almost constantly until it is big enough to move around on its own at about 3 months old. When a panda is about 18 months old, it is ready to venture out on its own, having learned the survival skills it needs from its mother. Octopus moms stop eating and will not leave the area while guarding their offspring, no matter how long it takes for them to hatch. The longest such period ever observed by scientists was 4.5 years. Once the little ones are safely out in the wild, the mother passes away of starvation. About 6 hours after dolphin calves are born, the mothers will begin to nurse their young for at least 4 times each hour for the first 4 to 8 days, and mothers continue to nurse their calves for up to 18 months. Calves start swimming alongside their mothers right from birth. Mothers and the calves typically develop an extremely strong bond, and calves stay with their mothers for up to 6 years before going out on their own. Sperm whales, for example, nurse their young for over 2 years. Many whale species maintain long-lasting bonds with their children. Resistant orca mothers and their children stay together. I'm sorry. Resident orca mothers and their children stay together their entire lives, even after they have offspring of their own. Mothers have just one calf every 5 years, and mothers watch over their young 24/7. Calves don't sleep for the first month of their lives, so mothers go without sleep too. Throughout its life, a resident orca will only separate from its mother for a few hours at a time to forage and mate. 5 Remarkable Animal Moms. Stories, WWF. World Wildlife Fund. worldwildlife.org. 5 Remarkable Animal Moms. The animal kingdom is flush with extraordinary parents. Orangutan. During the first 2 years of life, the young rely entirely on their mothers for both food and transportation. The moms stay with their young for 6 to 7 years, teaching them where to find food, what and how to eat, and the technique for building a sleeping nest. Polar bear mothers usually give birth to twin cubs that stick by her for about 2 years to learn the necessary survival skills in the cold climate. Cheetah mothers raise their young in isolation. They move their litter, usually 2 to 6 cubs, every 4 days to prevent a buildup of smell that predators can track. Emperor penguin. The mother then travels up to 50 miles to reach the ocean and fish. Newsweek. 19 Animals That Stay with Their Parents the Longest by Amanke Tapia. African elephants. Female elephants have the longest gestation period of any mammal, 22 months. And after a very long pregnancy, mums have no time to rest. Baby elephants are not only born nearly blind, but they rely on their trunks and mothers for everything. Their moms will usually nurse them for 4 to 6 years. African lions will fiercely look after their cubs until they can fend for themselves when they are about 16 months old. Alligators. Female alligators' mothers will carry each egg in her jaws from the nest to the water to protect them from predators. They will stay looking after them after about a year. Chimpanzees. Dolphins. Most dolphins feed their babies their rich breast milk for 2 to 3 years. Gray kangaroo have brief pregnancies. After 21 to 38 days, they give birth to a joey that will stay in their mother's pouch until they are 9 months old. But even after getting out of the pouch, it takes 1 year to become self-dependent, so it is up to their moms to look after them full time. Giraffes. A giraffe is an animal that can be pregnant while they are nursing the previous ones, and mother giraffes spend most of their life either nursing or pregnant. Gorillas are pregnant for about 8 to 9 months, and once they give birth, their babies will stay in their full-time care until the age of 3 to 4 years old. Koalas. Koala joeys stay in their mother's pouch for up to 6 months, and it is only from around that age that they begin to emerge and attach themselves to their mother's back. Koala joeys stay about 6 months inside their mother's pouch, feeding on milk which helps them in forming their ears, eyes. They are born blind, and fur. Mouth-brooding fish. The species of fish defined as mouth brooders protect their eggs by keeping them in their mouths. Mouth brooders include sea catfish, cardinal fish, pikeheads, or jawfishes among them. As soon as the eggs are fertilized, mothers don't eat in order to avoid swallowing them. Orangutans. After the birth of a baby orangutan, and for about 4 months, the infant never loses physical contact with the mom. For the first 2 years of their lives, they completely depend on their mothers, who may nurse them until they are 6 years old and have learned all the survival skills required to manage on their own. Orcas. Female orcas stay with their mothers for the rest of their lives. Polar bears. When a baby cub is born, the dedicated polar bear mother never leaves her cubs until they are about 2.5 years old. During this period, she fully trains them to learn survival skills. While pregnant, polar bear females spend 9 months sheltering in a small den in preparation for birth, where they can go 4 to 8 months without eating. Penguins. After an egg is laid, mother emperor penguin leaves it with the father, who keeps it safe and warm. The mother then travels to the ocean to reach fish and return to the hatching site to feed the hatched chicks via regurgitation. The penguin chicks need their parents for survival, and they will stay with them for about 6 months. Tamarins. The South American primates enjoy living in family groups, and babies will stay with their parents until they are young adults. Wolves. Wolf cubs stay with their mother for about 10 months. The female wolf is a very nurturing mother and keeps her pups in a den for 3 to 4 weeks before allowing them out into the light. A garden wolf spider carries her brood of over 100 babies on her back for protection. The baby spiders will stay on her back for 30 to 40 days. Schooled. Animals that teach their young. National Geographic. Schooled. Animals that teach their young. By Liz Langley. Southern pied babblers, birds native to southern Africa, school their young to associate a purr call with getting food. Superb fairy wrens teach a password to their chicks before they even hatch, which they'll later use to call for food. Europe's ants practice what's called tandem running, in which one ant shows another the way to a new food source, even slowing down to let the newbie keep up and note helpful landmarks. Africa's meerkats are patient tutors to their pups, showing them how to be careful with dangerous scorpions, one of their main sources of prey. If a pup is indifferent toward the scorpion, the teacher will often nudge it, and in vast majority percent of cases, the youngsters oblige and eat their dinner. Sperm whale adults share information. Calves learn their dialect or coda, a specific sequence of clicks unique to their regional group from mothers. Ideas.ted.com. Science. How do animals learn how to be, well, animals? Carl Safina. The philosopher Immanuel Kant asserted, man is the only being who needs education. Kittens who watch their mothers become better hunters faster. Kittens who watch their mothers become better hunters faster than kittens who must figure out what claws and teeth are for. A lot of learning travels socially from parents to offspring or from elders in groups. From elders, a baby orca learns the identity of their clan and specialized hunting and traveling customs. A baby elephant learns who her family is. Songbirds learn their local dialect. Bower birds watch elder masters build the most seductive bowers. And parrots learn who their friends are. Lions and wolves learn the specialties of their family's hunting techniques. Culture is skills, behaviors, and attractions learned and spread socially. They're not purely instinctive. Some cultural customs are arbitrary. Others are crucial for survival. But culture isn't exclusively human. Black bear expert Ben Killam has rewilded hundreds of orphaned cubs. Normally, their mother introduces typical foods, situations, and dangers to them. If you go walking with cubs, Ben elaborates, you see they want information. Some plants are poisonous. What's good? Once Ben knew the tiny cubs he was out with had never eaten red clover. So I found some, bent down, put it in my mouth. They rushed over and stuck their noses in my mouth, smelling. Then they immediately went searching for what I was eating and found some red clover and ate it. In Uganda, a little chimpanzee rides his mother's back to a drying water hole. Mother wades some moss, dips it, puts the wet sponge into her mouth, and presses out a drink. She gives her little prince the sponge. He learns how to quench dry season thirst. Watching their elders, young chimps learn. This is good. This avoid. They learn where food trees are. Young chimps watch mom's social deference, and dominance. Their long childhood, like ours, is for learning their cultured existence. That's why it's almost impossible for a captive chimpanzee to return to nature. A defenseless infant sperm whale waits at the sunlit surface while his mother hunts squid thousands of feet below. Nearby, his babysitting aunt waits her turn to dive and forage. In a culture, researcher Shane Giro says, as we drift deep Caribbean swells off Dominica, you are who you are because you're with who you're with. Because of who you're with, you do what you do in the way that you do it. Behavior is what you do, Shane sums up. Culture is how you've learned to do it. After giving birth in the tropics, humpback whales, right whales, gray whales, and others who fasted several months trek back to colder waters and their food. Their little one follows. For their whole lives to come, they will travel the route learned from their mother. Eventually, their little ones will learn it. Beluga whales travel 6,000 kilometers a year along culturally learned ancestral migration routes. Sea otters learn a foraging specialty from their mothers and keep it lifelong. Shorebirds called oyster catchers specialize in either stabbing or hammering open mussels. Chicks whose parents stab mussels develop the stabbing technique. Those whose parents hammer mussels hammer them. Learning from elders is vastly faster than evolution that relies on genetic variations, the winnowing of survivors, and the slow spread of changing genes. Perhaps the most bizarre and therefore instructive example of young picking up adult culture from parents is the mallard duckling, who was adopted by loons and did loony things. Mallards never ride their parents' backs. Loons do, and this adopted mallard did. Mallards never swim underwater. Loons do, and this adopted mallard did. Mallards never catch fish. Loons do, and this adopted mallard ate the fish its loon parents fed it. When a nice normal loon family has a nice normal chick or two riding around, diving and eating fish, we assume chicks ride parents by instinct, dive by instinct, and eat fish simply because that's loon dinner. It takes a wayward duckling in an alien family to give us a whiff of how much cultural learning goes on and how much flexibility exists each step of the way. Just a few years ago, many behavioral scientists considered learning by watching exclusively human. But even seeing young dogs model their behavior on older dogs, for instance, reveal widespread tendencies to learn how we do things. Carl Safina. 1 in 4 American moms return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Vox. 1 in 4 American moms return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Here's what it's like. By Sarah Cliff. New moms in the United States return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Looking specifically at the 93 women who took time off work to care for a new baby. Nearly 12% of those women took off only a week or less. Another 11% took between 1 and 2 weeks off. That means that about 23%, nearly 1 in 4 of the women interviewed were back at work within 2 weeks of having a child. Sharon Lerner writes, 80% of college graduates took at least 6 weeks off to care for a new baby, but only 54% of women without college degrees did so. Lerner writes about Natasha Long, who went back to her factory job shortly after her son Jaden's birth. She would get up at 4 a.m. to pump breast milk before work and sneak out to pump again on breaks in her car in the parking lot. Why 1 in 4 U.S. women return to work 2 weeks after childbirth. U.S. News, The Guardian. Why 1 in 4 U.S. women return to work 2 weeks after childbirth. Miranda Bryant. Jessica Rebeschini was advised to take at least 6 weeks off work to recover from an emergency C-section surgery and bond with her newborn child, Carter. But she immediately started looking for a job. Within 2 weeks, she was working 45-hour weeks as a waitress doing night shifts. Mother of 3 from Bondurant, Iowa. 1 in 4 women in the U.S. return to work within 2 weeks of childbirth, according to the advocacy group Paid Leave U.S. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recommends women take at least 6 weeks off work following childbirth. Speaking of her newborn, I would come home and the first thing I did was make sure that he was breathing. When you're not physically there, you just have to trust that he's fine. You worry about the bond of being gone for so long. Is he going to recognize you? Carter is now 4 years old, but Rebeschini worries about the potential impact of her early absence. Rebeschini has since had a third child, Brody, who is now 1. This time she took 2 months off. So after not being able to be there with her child 24/7, like some of the animals that we read about earlier, her not being able to stay with her child 24/7, she had another child after that. Kristen Moody, 36, a waitress from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 1 week off after giving birth to her son, Alex, now 13. As a single mother, Moody depended on the help of family and child care. Jessica Mann, 35, owner of Chicago-based beauty company Ari Rose Body Care, was back at work 5 days after giving birth to her 1-year-old daughter, Lila. Man was also doing the majority of the care for her 3 children. We have a new baby and we have 3 kids. To not work and not have that income would also impact our household. Virginia delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy was back on the campaign trail knocking doors 2 weeks after giving birth by C-section to her now 2-year-old twin sons, Alex and Xander, who were born premature and spent 4 months in neonatal intensive care. The 5th trimester, when new moms return to work. CNN Health, the 5th trimester, when new moms return to work. Kelly Wallace, CNN. Kelly Wallace is CNN's digital correspondent and editor-at-large, covering family, career, and life. On my first day back at work as a network news correspondent, a late assignment meant I arrived home long after my daughter had gone to bed. The phone rang as I got ready for work. I needed to travel to Massachusetts to cover a story, away from my daughter. Before I gave birth, I thought I'd return to my hard-charging television correspondent role 3 months after delivery and pick up exactly where I left off. Wow. The average respondent said they were physically back 5.5 months after delivery and emotionally back after almost 6 months. If a woman is able to take the 3 months of unpaid leave required in the United States under federal law, in most cases, companies with fewer than 50 employees are exempt, she is still running months before she feels emotionally and physically back. She is still returning months before she feels emotionally and physically back, and months before she is getting a decent night's sleep. Labor and Employment Report. Shaw Rosenthal LLP. Maternity Parental Leave Policies, A Trap for the Unwary, by Fiona W. Ong. For many years, the EEOC has taken the position that post-childbirth leave for bonding and childcare purposes must be provided to both male and female employees on an equal basis, while leave that is tied to post-birth disability may be provided to females only. Therefore, providing a maternity leave policy not tied to disability that offers greater leave benefits than a paternity leave policy constitutes a violation of Title VII, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, according to the EEOC. According to the ACLU announcement, J.P. Morgan's assumption that mothers are the primary caregivers is problematic. So the parents left a week after giving birth. The mother left after a week after giving birth, 2 weeks in some cases, a couple months, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months at the most. Now it's time for the child to leave. Webster's Dictionary 1828. Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, the online version. Educate. To bring up as a child. To instruct. To inform and enlighten the understanding. To instill into the mind principles of arts, science, morals, religion, and behavior. To educate children well is one of the most important duties of parents and guardians. Webster's Dictionary 1828, Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, the online version. Education. The bringing up as of a child, instruction, formation of manners. Education comprehends all that series of instruction and discipline which is intended to enlighten the understanding, correct the temper, and form the manners and habits of youth, and fit them for usefulness in their future stations. To give children a good education in manners, arts, and science is important. To give them a religious education is indispensable. And an immense responsibility rests on parents and guardians who neglect these duties. Thesaurus.com. Educate. Synonyms for educate: brainwash, civilize, coach, drill, foster, indoctrinate, mature, nurture, school, drum into. Antonyms for educate: learn, brainwash, alter, condition, educate, indoctrinate, persuade. Break in, condition, educate. Breed, develop, discipline, educate, nourish. Bring up, breed, develop, discipline, educate, feed, foster, nourish, nurture, provide for, rear, train. Basics in education. The Leipzig Connection by Paolo Leone. The Leipzig Connection. In the final years of the 19th century, a great transformation began in American education. The same schools that once nurtured the American dream would become infested with drugs and crime, and high schools would be graduating students who could barely read, spell, or do simple arithmetic. Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt. Accepted a chair in philosophy at the University of Leipzig in Germany. Wundt asserted that man is devoid of spirit and self-determination. Wundt asserted that man is devoid of spirit and self-determinism. He set out to prove that man is the summation of his experiences, of the stimuli which intrude upon his consciousness and unconsciousness. Originally, Education meant the drawing out of a person's innate talents and abilities by imparting the knowledge of languages, scientific reasoning, history, literature, rhetoric, etc., the channels through which those abilities would flourish and serve. To the experimental psychologist, however, education became the process of exposing the student to meaningful experiences so as to ensure desired reactions. If one assumes, as did one, that there is nothing there to begin with but a body, a brain, and a nervous system, then one must try to educate by inducing sensations in that nervous system. Through these experiences, the individual will learn, through these experiences, the individual will learn to respond to any given stimulus with the correct response. The child is not, for example, thought capable of volitional control over his actions or of deciding whether he will act or not act in a certain way. He is a stimulus response mechanism. Schools oriented more toward the socialization of the child than toward the development of intellect, and for the emergence of a society more and more blatantly devoted to the gratification of sensory desires at the expense of responsibility and achievement. The first of once American students to return to the United States was G. Stanley Hall. Returning from Leipzig in 1883, he joined the faculty of Baltimore's new Johns Hopkins University, which was being established after the model of the great German universities. Hall was also instrumental in furthering the career of a man who was to have an unusually profound effect on the course of American education, John Dewey. His older brother by 1.5 years, Davis Rich Dewey, who later became professor of economics and statistics at MIT, spent a year studying under Hall. The Wundtian redefinition of education to mean feeding experimental data to a young brain and nervous system rather than the teaching of mental skills led to the abdication of the traditional role of the teacher as an educator. Its place was taken by the concept of the teacher as a guide in the socialization of the child, leading each youngster to adapt to the specific behavior required of him in order for him to get along in his group. According to Professors Mort and Vincent of Columbia Teachers College, John Dewey was the culminating theorist in 3 centuries of educational writing. To Dewey, as to Wundt, man was an animal, alone with his reactions and entirely dependent upon experiential data. He believed that learning occurred only through experience, that the stimulus response mechanism was basic to learning, and that the teachers were not instructors, but designers of learning experiences. At the Dewey School in Chicago and later at Teachers College of Columbia University, Dewey was able to implement and promote the interchangeability of psychology and education, successfully enough to become the leading figure in American education. Yet Dewey, the father of American education, was only one of the practitioners of Wundt's revised psychology, who critically transformed American education and, consequently, American life. G. Stanley Hall had been once first American student. His compatriot, James McKean Cattell, had the distinction of being once first assistant and went to Leipzig. Charles Judd, fresh from Germany with the Leipzig doctorate from Wundt, later left Wesleyan to become successively instructor in psychology at New York's University School of Pedagogy, professor of psychology and pedagogy at the University of Cincinnati, director of the psychological laboratory and psychology instructor at Yale, and finally, in 1909, director of the School of Education at the University of Chicago. James Earl Russell, a student of Wundt's, who received his doctorate from Leipzig. Russell directed the Central Department at Teachers College, became dean of the college. He would run it for the next 30 years, building the largest institution in the world for the training of teachers. Russell began to hire a faculty. One of his first choices was Frank McMurray, who had also studied psychology at Leipzig. His basic interests also extended to the curriculum of the elementary school. Edward Lee Thorndike was trained in the new psychology by the first generation of Wundt's protégés. Thorndike's specialty was the puzzle box, into which he would put various animals, chickens, rats, cats, and let them find their way out by themselves. Russell offered Thorndike a job at Teachers College, where the experimenter remained for the next 30 years. Thorndike equated children with the rats, monkeys, fish, cats, and chickens upon which he experimented in his laboratory, and was prepared to apply what he found there to learning in the classroom. Thorndike based conditioning on what he called the law of effect, which held that those actions and behaviors leading to satisfaction would be impressed or stamped in on the child, and those leading to unsatisfactory results would be stamped out. The theory creates certain problems for the educator. Should the child not want to learn his multiplication, the teacher would have to find some way of making multiplication pleasurable and rewarding, or the child just won't learn it. This thinking favors a society which operates more on the basis of gratification than on the basis of reason or responsibility. Previously, good behavior was considered its own reward. The idea of rewarding a child for behaving like a human, being would only occur to someone who supposes that the child is basically an animal and would have seemed like an open invitation to blackmail to any sensible 19th century parent. Individualism and the developing of individual abilities give way to social conformity and adaptation. Individualism and the developing of individual abilities give way to social conformity and adaptation. The product of education becomes well-adjusted, conditioned children. Thorndike's premise is that intelligence is permanently set before the student enters school. It absolves educators from the responsibility for any of their students not learning. Before 1900, the way to identify a good teacher was to determine that his students, at the end of their studies, knew a subject. His conclusions and methods were imported into an expanding American educational system and decimated throughout that system. His conclusions and methods were imported into an expanding American educational system and disseminated throughout the system to teachers, counselors, and administrators. Within half a century, juvenile delinquency would run rampant. Illiterates would pour out of the schools. Teachers would no longer learn how to teach. And generation after generation of adults, themselves cheated out of the fruits of a good education, would despair of any solution to the morass of modern education. It took hundreds of millions of dollars to turn American education around in that shorter period of time. Where did the money that inflamed this epidemic come from? The answer? The checks were to emanate not from the uptown headquarters of Columbia Teachers College in New York City's Morningside Heights, but from number 26 Broadway, the corporate home of the Standard Oil Company, owned and operated by John D. Rockefeller Sr. The indigenous American educational system was deeply rooted in the beliefs and practices of the Puritan fathers, the Quakers, the early American patriots and philosophers. Jefferson had maintained that in order to preserve liberty in the new nation, it was essential that its citizenry be educated. The younger Rockefeller was captivated by the possibilities of a Negro Education Board. A month later, the same group assembled again, this time to charter a new organization called the General Education Board for the promotion of education within the United States without distinction of race, sex, or creed. The real motivation behind the General Education Board, however, was perhaps best expressed in the board's occasional letter number 1, written by Gates. In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good. We work our own good will upon. The present education conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will, our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple, as well as a very beautiful one. To train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. So we will organize our children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shops, and on the farm. These men conspired to control American education while buttressing the Rockefeller fortune against all attacks. These men conspired to control American education while buttressing the Rockefeller fortune against all attacks, ensuring that their autocratic views would prevail. With the General Education Board, Rockefeller's Education Trust, a virtually unlimited source of funds was to be made available to the Wundtian psychologists' ambitious designs on American education. To Dewey and Thorndike, the schoolroom was a great laboratory in which to do their research and refine the modification of instincts and capabilities into habits and powers. Abraham Flexner was an able fundraiser, an experienced educator, and an organizer who felt he had the solution to both the supposed failure of American education and to the need of the General Education Board to disperse the Rockefeller millions. Educated at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Berlin, Flexner's first impact on American education had taken the form of Germanizing American medical education. By the time Flexner joined the board, his attack on American medical education, which had been front page news across the country, had resulted in the number of medical schools in the United States dropping from 147 to 95. The board's sponsorship of chemical medicine on the one hand and psychology on the other would culminate in 1963 when a group of researchers at Johns Hopkins developed the use of Ritalin to treat children who were regarded as troubled or too active. The board's sponsorship of chemical medicine on the one hand and psychology on the other would culminate in 1963 when a group of researchers at Johns Hopkins developed the use of Ritalin to treat children who were regarded as troubled or too active. Senator Chamberlain of Oregon leading the attack on the General Education Board. We owe something to our ancestors who founded and maintained our older institutions of learning. We have no right to bind up the offerings which they laid upon the altar of higher education in the enslaving conditions prescribed by the Rockefeller Board of Institutions to which it grants its humiliating doles. By 1953, Wundtian psychology had reached out from Teachers College into virtually every public school in the land. The single most powerful educational force in the world is at 120th Street and Broadway in New York City. Teachers College has managed to seat about 1/3 of the presidents and deans now. Its graduates make up about 20% of all our public school teachers. Over 1/4 of the superintendents of schools in the 168 U.S. cities with at least 50,000 population are Teachers College trained. Wundt is remembered only by psychologists. Gates, Flexner, Cattell, Russell, even Thorndike are found only in texts written by their disciples. They may seem irrelevant to today's critical educational problems: drug abuse, illiteracy, criminality, lowered standards, lack of motivation and self-discipline. Looking further, you will find that despite the increasing billions that the large foundations and now the federal government pour into American education, the situation just keeps getting worse. This idea that man is a stimulus response animal and the methods it implies has played a critical role in transforming the American dream into a national nightmare. It has turned our homes, schools, offices, stores, and factories into the battlegrounds of World War III. The draftees drift from encounter to encounter, increasing numbers succumbing as neurotic mental and spiritual casualties. The greatest number of victims, however, is in the 5 to 16-year-old range, as roughly 1/4 of the population is recruited into the compulsory federal behavior clinics, cosmetically known as schools. Two hallmarks of a failed educational system are its inability to produce people who can resolve the problems of education itself, and its propensity for elevating to positions of power and authority people who will invent, advocate, and enforce bizarre and destructive solutions. Compulsory universal government psychotherapy is not education. Compulsory universal government psychotherapy is not education. NAEP Mathematics. Mathematics Highlights 2022. The Nation's Report Card. NAEP Report Card 2022. NAEP Mathematics Assessment. Largest score declines in NAEP Mathematics at grades 4 and 8 since initial assessments in 1990. In 2022, the average fourth grade mathematics score decreased by 5 points and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2005. The average score was 1 point higher compared to 2003. The average eighth grade mathematics score decreased by 8 points compared to 2019 and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2003. In 2022, fourth and eighth grade mathematics scores declined for most states' jurisdictions as well as for most participating urban districts compared to 2019. Average scores are reported on NAEP mathematics scale at grades 4 and 8 that range from 0 to 500. The Nation's Report Card. NAEP Report Card 2022 NAEP Reading Assessment. Scores decline in NAEP reading at grades 4 and 8 compared to 2019. In 2022, the average reading score at both 4th and 8th grade decreased by 3 points compared to 2019. At 4th grade, the average reading score was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2005 and was not significantly different in comparison to 1992. At 8th grade, the average reading score was lower compared to all previous assessment years going back to 1998 and was not significantly different compared to 1992. In 2022, 4th and 8th grade reading scores declined for most states' jurisdictions compared to 2019. This is from nationalreportcard.gov. The purpose of education. The purpose of education. This is from isha.sadhguru.org. Sadhguru says, educating yourself fundamentally means to broaden your horizons. From being in limitedness, you want to enlarge yourself. Unfortunately, the form of education that is imparted to people today, despite broadening their information capabilities, makes them very narrow in terms of their perception and inclusion of life around them. The whole education process is just about survival. Education should not be about survival. It should be about broadening your horizons. Because people have become so mad about their economic status, we have twisted education into a way of milking money from the world. If one keeps his intelligence uncluttered, wherever you put him, he will survive. We want to produce not just loving, wonderful adults, but very resilient adults. Even if you put him in hell, he should slowly convert it into heaven. Quotes about education by Sadhguru. Our concept of education has to go beyond manufacturing cogs for the economic engine. Education need not only be a tool for survival, but for enhancing perception. The children must blossom and flower into great human beings. Teaching should not be a profession. It must be a passion. Only then can education move from imposition of facts to exploration of truth. Education should not be about molding children the way you want them, but about supporting their natural longing to know. Education is not about loading the child's mind with information, but about making it capable of razor-sharp perception, capable of knowing life in its full depth and dimension. From the day you are born, everyone is trying to educate you about something that has not worked in their lives. Modern education is purely informative. There is no inspiration. Without inspiration, no human being rises beyond the limitations in which he lives. I don't care about your excuses. I don't care about your excuses. You're not raising your children. I know you gotta go to work. Who else gonna pay the bills? I know. Who gonna buy food? Ain't nobody else gonna do it. My child's father ain't doing shh. Think about the well-being of the children before you lay down instead of after you get up. Do the right thing.